All right. Last panel of the day, also last session of Stable Summit. Thank you so much for staying with us. I promise you this is gonna be a spicy one. If you've been following the posts on Twitter corresponding to this panel, you already know what I'm talking about. But if not, no worries. You're gonna catch up live with us today. So, okay, people are asking whether we can have one more mic.
It's okay, Frax doesn't have
Hello.
to talk. We can just...
It's all good.
It's a fractionalized mic.
Hello.
Okay, so today we talk about how to build a truly censorship-resistant currency. So we start with that. Why is the case that we still don't have such a solution yet? We're gonna explore why that's the case. We're also gonna look at what is the level of decentralization and censorship-resistant of different stablecoin solutions that we have today. And also, we're gonna explore what's still missing and basically how we can improve as an ecosystem. Before we jump into the conversation, I suggest we run a short session of intros. I'm gonna start myself. So my name is Bianca Buzea. I'm the founder of DevRel Uni. At DevRel Uni, we teach people how to do developer relations and basically how to bring developers to the ecosystem. I'm gonna pass it now to our lovely panelists.
Thank you so much. Hey everyone, I'm DeFi Dave. I am a core advocate at Frax, a small, humble part of the community, and I am the founder and co-host of Flywheel DeFi, a grassroots media organization dedicated to covering Frax, DeFi, and everything in between.
Hey guys, my name is David. I am one of the co-founders of Raft. Raft is a CDP protocol that uses liquid staking tokens as collateral. Perfect. That's it.
Someone is playing around.
Hi guys, I'm Benjamin. I'm chief janitor at Cheetah Protocol. I clean the toilets, watch the windows. Cheetah is a cross-chain CDP protocol. It's the most cross-chain CDP protocol. Yeah, that's all.
And hi, I'm Bryce. I'm more known as Token Bryce on CT and around. I've been involved in quite a few things doing DeFi since it pretty much started. But yeah, I guess the main achievements would be the French community, DeFi France, and I'm also the DeFi strategist at Liquidity, handling topics related to liquidity and integration on LUSD stablecoin and NQTY.
All right, thank you all. Now that we met our panelists for tonight, I suggest we start with a broad overview on the ecosystem. So I would like to start with what are the characteristics, in your opinion, that basically define a truly censorship-resistant currency?
If you don't mind that I start, because it was literally the topic of my last talk in Belgrade, if you want to have a deep dive on this for 30 minutes. But essentially, I map it under 4 different dimensions, 4 to 5, but I'm going to be easy with you and go with 4. So the first one is related to the collateral. You're outputting your stable coins, meaning you have some form of tokens or whatever real-world assets, something that has value that is used to back this stable coin. This collateral has characteristics that will have consequences on the stable coin. So that's the first dimension. The second dimension would be related to governance. So your system, your stablecoin can have or not a governance, and this governance can change the system. So you'll have consequences and impact on its resilience. The third dimension would be related, and that's often forgotten, it's the liquidity component. So this is, for instance, where Terra failed, because the liquidity was simply not sized to stomach all the outflows, and eventually it crashed. And finally, the fourth one is also quite misunderstood. It's a broad family of technical risk, but the thing here is you have the technical risk of the protocol itself, but you also need to properly assess any third-party dependency of that protocol. So if the protocol is using the collateral in another protocol, it becomes part of your risk scope, and so on. And since you have a lot of, connections and interusability of DeFi protocols, it can be a bit messy to assess. One thing to keep in mind with that too is that those 4 dimensions worked under a logic of the lowest common denominator. So for instance, if at the collateral stage, your collateral has a counterparty. So for instance, you use USDC as collateral, you have counterparty here. You have actual bank accounts in the US that are holding the assets, and those might have issues. You kind of know the drill. Essentially, this means I don't care what happened at the 4 other layers. Because of the lowest denominator logic, you cannot achieve censorship resilience with a collateral that has a counterparty.
I'd like to piggyback off what you just said about the USDC as collateral. I think one aspect as well on the counterparty risk is liquidations, because at least 3 of us here rely a lot on liquidations. If there's a drop in the price of your collateral, you have to be able to liquidate. That puts a great risk because you have a dependency on DEXs. If there's no DEXs for people to exchange ETH for your other tokens, then that can become a problem, especially when you're talking about the quality of those DEXs.
Depends of the model though, because for instance on liquidity we have stability pool reserve for USD, so you don't need liquidity on DEXs to liquidate. The liquidity is already there to liquidate up to whatever is stored in the stability pool.
Yeah, well, somebody would have to go to the stability pool to buy the ETH, right?
So
you
now,
get ETH for putting.
I mean, we can go into that later, but essentially the reserve is supplied by depositors and available instantly for liquidation. So literally up to anything stored in the stability pool can be used for liquidation. So at was right now, the liquidity protocol can liquidate about 60% of the whole borrowing value.
Yeah, and there's where I guess the problem lies, right? Because you have to be able to bootstrap enough to liquidate everything. And it's amazing to be able to have like some sort of like native liquidations. But if you're relying on the protocol to liquidate and it's not able to liquidate, you're kind of screwed.
Yeah.
Can I add to this a little bit about the censorship resistance of the collateral types? In my opinion, I have a little bit of a different view here. I think for any CDP protocol, the important thing is that the collateral doesn't have any sort of blacklisting function, so the collateral doesn't get stuck in the protocol, and it's always capable of being liquidated. So in my opinion, having, for example, DAI as collateral doesn't actually add any sort of censorship risk as long as those positions can be taken out and liquidated and the positions are over-collateralized. That, because there's no blacklist function, any sort of deviation or any black swan event would be actually reflecting the price of DAI, it would drop and then the positions would be taken out. So I think like the important thing is like the censorship resistance of the collateral on the blacklist level.
And I think that's a good point that you mentioned, that DAI doesn't have too much risk with the blacklisting, but it is risk because it's another asset. And so if we go back to finance fundamentals, how do you get rid of most of the risk? You diversify, because you will never be able to get rid of like the overall market risk. So you should be able to accept as many collaterals as you can within the range of what is safe, and that will make you a safer protocol than if you just accept one collateral. That's my point of view.
Yeah, sure.
Maybe Frax, I don't know how we bring you into the conversation.
No, you're kind of just all like taking what I've been thinking. For me, with censorship resistance, I kind of view it as a spectrum, and I think you can, like the most censorship resistant thing out there is Bitcoin, to be honest. If you want like a truly censorship resistant currency, use Bitcoin. If you're going to use a stablecoin, especially a dollar-pegged stablecoin, you're inherently going into a dollar universe. Like you'll always be tied to that no matter what your collateral is. So you're accepting that. You can only kind of minimize the surface area of censorship. So if you care about censorship a lot, use something with only ETH collateral. If you want something that scales, use something with US, like dollar pegged collateral. So, you know, with USDC, yeah, you have Circle, but you can scale with that. It would be better if you had something else like more native backing it, of course, but it exists on a spectrum.
This actually brings me to the next topic. So we explored a bit about the censorship resistance in different projects, but maybe we go more in depth and we kind of do an analysis about different projects that exist right now in terms of stablecoins and what is their status in terms of decentralization and censorship resistant.
Yeah, I mean, it's good to remember that the whole decentralization or trustlessness is indeed a spectrum, as Dave was saying. And if we want to be, okay, we're amongst pro here. So if we want to be perfectly accurate, I would say as of now, there is no censorship-resistant stablecoin on mainnet, like to the absolute end of the spectrum. And if you want the full deets, for liquidity, we are I mean, not we, but like the protocol is recognized as the most censorship resistant, but essentially the main caveat would be that
By who? I mean, let's we're gonna make
I mean,
claims like that.
we can debate, but I guess, of course, you guys on the panel won't agree, but the broader DeFi space agrees, and every
I don't know who
independent
the broader
institution.
DeFi space is, man.
I mean,
I think
we'll
I
get
would
into that
challenge
later.
that, yeah.
I was
We'll get into
literally
the
giving
details
you
now.
kudos on like trying to build on, but anyway. So like the main limit for liquidity would be that at the Oracle level, there is 2 Oracle services used with a logic to switch in between. So that is not a single point of failure, but that's like a redundant double single point of failure, or whatever you want to call this. But you see that's obviously not ideal. Obviously, you would want uncensorable, trustless oracles and tons of them. So that would be an area of improvement. But just kind of to show that, you know, as of now, we don't even know if it's theoretically possible, or at least so far, I would be glad to see a stablecoin coming to mainnet that can actually be placed right to liquidity on the censorship resilient spectrum. I would be like the most happy person the day that happened, but so far it hasn't happened.
I think it's important as well to be very honest about the risk associated with your protocol. I remember in the time of Luna, when that was going on, if you said anything bad about Luna, I mean, like you were destroyed on crypto Twitter. And if we remain honest and we remain very open about receiving criticism, I think we can keep users safe and we can let them make the decision. Because the truth is that whenever you make a decision on how to make your protocol safer or more censorship resistant, you are exchanging that for something else. Like you're letting go of something else. Like for example, at Cheetah, there are a lot of things that you can upgrade. There are a lot of things that you can change via governance. And we do that because we think that the current state of infrastructure is not where it's going to be at its end state. And perhaps there will never be an end state. And so you take away in that you don't know what the changes are going to be, right? But you gain in that you can adapt to a changing world where infrastructure can improve.
Yeah, and I think if you talk about Oracle specifically, that's a very good example of that, about how we basically all rely on some sort of Chainlink,
Yeah.
specifically, yeah, Chainlink or other Oracle providers. And I think like the question here in terms of like the censorship resistance standpoint is like, who do you want the users to trust? Do you want the users to trust Chainlink, or do you want them to trust the protocol? And this is where the idea comes in, whether is it better to hard code an Oracle, or is it better to be able to change it? Because the censorship resistance comes from being able to censor Chainlink itself or the protocol multisig. And that's the question, right? Which one's better?
Yes, I would just add the caveat that as soon as you have governance and mutable parameters, you add an attack vector to your system. So for instance, in the case of Raft, it's a 3 out of 5 multisig, and anyone that gains control of this multisig can do tremendous damage to the protocol.
Yeah, I mean, I would add to the governance part, there have been a lot of innovations happening, because at the start, it was like you vote and the vote causes changes in the protocol. But if you look at Optimism, for example, they have like the different houses, like of the citizens or whatever. There are ways of adding more humans into it to make it safer, but then I guess more humans, more in, you don't know what's going to happen.
Yeah, and speaking of innovations, you know, one of the biggest criticisms of Frax that was given is the multisig around it. Recently, what passed is FraxGov, which ultimately gets rid of the multisigs and brings ultimate power to the token holders. And yeah, it's like some action can be like taken by the team, but it takes a lot longer. There's a lot more checks. And like honestly, like if the protocol wanted to dissolve and like somebody like got enough FXS tokens, they could do that. But that's, you know, something we sacrifice for decentralization.
Yeah, I agree with that. Yeah, I want to go back to the Oracle part a little bit and discuss a little bit more, because I think my point is partly misunderstood. Is that if you have an Oracle, for example, Chainlink, it's basically a wholly off-chain logic that's happening there. You're relying on a bunch of different sources to provide that information to you, and then is that better to rely on those parties exclusively and rely on things like the Chainlink's deviation threshold, the fact that it's going to happen good, there's no bugs, or is it better to trust a multisig and a DAO to actually say, okay, guys, if something bad happens with Chainlink, we don't tie the entire future of the project to that, but we can replace that with something else. And I think this is a very important question.
Yeah, I mean, if you're doing very vanilla assets like ETH, I think there are less chances that something's going to go wrong. But if you're trying to be, like for us, we're trying to be a stable coin for projects. We're trying to be a stable coin for various chains. and that has a lot of unknowns, and so you need some sort of upgradability. Perhaps with Liquidity only accepting ETH, they can kind of get away with hoping that Chainlink will be fine. I mean, Chainlink's a wonderful team. We all like Chainlink. We all use Chainlink. But you make a good point that who knows what's going to happen.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, and I mean, you can address for this with redundancy. And if you ask me now to hard code another ETH-based Oracle into a system, again, as I was saying earlier, I would probably add another 2 or 3 layers of Oracle based on price observes on DEXs or things like that. But you also have to keep in mind that Liquidity was shipped to mainnet in April 2021, so designed even before that. So essentially composing with the best options available at the time.
Oh, you guys launched in April 2021.
Yes, more than
Launched
2
in
years
May.
old.
I think we identify some potential points of centralization, such as, for example, the reliance of oracles. But how else you would say that we can achieve further decentralization besides basically finding some solutions around these problems? What else still needs to be addressed in order to have a better decentralized system when it comes to stablecoins?
I think the biggest question that hasn't been answered, and this is shared amongst all different kinds of stablecoins, is liquidity. Because today, liquidity costs way too much money. And for any stablecoin to succeed long-term, you need to have good liquidity. And a lot of the OG Ethereum stablecoins rely on CRV positions, rely on CVX to cut down their cost of capital. We, for better or for worse, don't have any of that because we started on Polygon. And so we have to be very acutely aware of how much we spend on liquidity mining. And there's like Solidity forks that last like 3 months, and there's like different things you can do that are very ephemeral. But to this day, I haven't seen something that can easily scale and you can rely on for the next 10 years, right? Like liquidity has been so like ever-changing that if something changes, you can really destroy the peg of a stablecoin, and that's a way of censoring it.
I'm just having flashbacks to our interview when you just kept on saying cost of capital, cost of capital.
Yeah.
But it's true, liquidity is such a big issue. And, with markets, it comes and goes. I mean, yeah, like the top of the bowl, like there was so much liquidity there. But like now, like you really have to get creative. And that's why Curve is so important in the ecosystem, because it's really the foundation of liquidity. It's like the liquidity base. And, at Frax, we recognize that. And I kind of consider Frax as like the ultimate liquidity player in it. And like that's the most important thing for a stablecoin, is being able, like having the option to, swap for like hundreds of millions of dollars. Like, yeah, will that happen? Yeah, at some point in the future, but we need that option there.
Yeah, maybe not with Circle. Now that they're like ever smaller,
Yeah.
we have to start thinking of how are we going to survive without them? How are we going to make liquidity? Because if there's less and less Circle, then it's going to be increasingly more expensive to sustain liquidity pools.
Yeah,
Where you... Oh.
Thank you. I think this kind of brings us to the whole question of like how liquidity is so important to maintaining a peg, right? And all of the stablecoins that we have rely on multiple mechanisms, like hard peg, soft peg, and the soft peg is the important part where you have the liquidity needs to be around the $1 mark so that people can actually use the stablecoin. And for this, like liquidity mining is probably not the good long-term solution. We can see all the liquidity hasn't been too sticky lately. So what are the other ways that we can make this work? We've seen a bunch of different approaches. We've seen protocol-owned liquidity kind of taking off for a little while, and then since token valuations have dropped significantly, that has become a less efficient way because you don't have that much money to play with. If the protocol's native token valuation is $100 million, and there's only so much you can do to acquire liquidity yourself. But I think like if when we go into the bull market, that will probably come back as one of the important things that we can all rely on, acquire liquidity for the protocol itself, and that's going to be sticky even if during turbulent times when the market drops after.
I think one thing that Frax and Liquidity will agree with me here is partnerships is a big thing. I mean, if you look at any DEX outside of Ethereum, it's Frax, Mai, and Liquidity on the L2s. And it's all because we're working together. I mean, it's very expensive to maintain liquidity on these L2s where retail wants 20% for the stablecoin, but you can only charge 2% on the loans. And it's been through these like crazy complicated schemes that we do to try to maintain liquidity that we're able to lower the cost of capital. But even then it's too high. even then it's very complicated. So, I mean, I look forward to seeing more stablecoins come out, like Go, like CRV USD. Maybe they can join the fund. Maybe you guys decide to go cross-chain.
Yeah, and it's important for all of us to work together in a positive sum manner. Otherwise, centralized stablecoins are just going to eat our lunch.
Yeah, this is what I was about to suggest when you guys were a bit worried about what are we going to do in a world without USDC. Well, hello guys, you can grow your LUSD pair. You will have a censorship-resistant pairing, or as censorship-resistant as it can be. And this is also why I was saying earlier, you know, this is one of the biggest blockers at Liquidity. Because, okay, we say, I agree with you on the means and finding sustainable solution, but let's abstract this for a minute. You give me $1 million to build Liquidity with. All right, who are we building Liquidity against? USDC? Censorable liquidity, not so interesting. Or the stables, we often run into the same thing. So essentially, to put it simply, even Liquidity itself would have a lot to gain by having another as censorship resilient or more censorship resilient stablecoin existing on mainnet, because then we'll be like the happiest to pair against them and build liquidity with them.
But they would run into the same issue that a lot of the new stablecoins run. Because if you're forking Liquidity, you're charging 0.5%.
I'm not saying a liquidity fork. I'm just saying a
like
model of
censorship
stablecoin that is as censorship resistant
like
or
if
more.
you're a new stablecoin today and you're trying to partner with somebody, who are you going to partner with? Dola or Frax?
Yeah.
Because they're throwing money. Or you're going to,
Right.
yeah, you should try that, guys. I see those USDC or the DAI pool, man. At least do DSR, man.
Yeah, we have a big DAI pool. It's like a $38 million at this point, but even that's like, you know, should be way bigger.
Yeah, the Frax base pool has been great for us to enter into Ethereum. CRV USD is quite nice because the team there is pretty amenable and they're willing to help out. But in the end of the day, it's like, yeah, you need those kind of like LPs.
And it's a bit of a structural situation to, I guess this is what people are missing on those liquidity games, is to put it simply, 99% of the time, most of your liquidity is useless. Because, you know, if you think about it, you take Frax, for instance, it's $1 billion face value market cap. We can discuss about that later, but it's okay. Let's say $1 billion. Okay, $1 billion. On an average day, obviously your users are not buying or dumping $1 billion of Frax. That would be the whole protocol output. They're more like trading 5 million Frax. That's what you see of daily volume average on the curve pool or something like that. So, you know, this is what I mean by most of the day. Like, I don't know how big is the pool now. Maybe, Dave, you could tell me, but let's say like 400-500 M or something like that, maybe bigger.
Yeah.
So like on an average day, they're trading like 1% of the pool. But the problem is now you have a day where, I don't know, East pumps, East dump, a centralized table breaks out or whatever, an event happened, and you go look at that pool and you might find 200 million volume there because everybody was, you know, moving money left and right, recollateralizing, paying back downs or doing whatever they needed to survive or to capitalize on the upside movement. And so, you know, essentially that's a whole reflection of you don't need most of your liquidity most of the time, but the day you need it, you need absolute tons of it because you can have tons of very worried people willing to pay 200 gas to swap the thing, and they hopefully want to have a rate as close as 1-to-1 to whatever other stable they're going. So in terms of how do you sustain that in the long run, it's really hard because it means the trading fees on those pools are not that exciting to begin with, you know, like 5 million of volume on a 500 M pool, like you're not going to sustain that just with organic fees. You need to like distribute tons of incentive to keep those 500 million there or have other devices, ammo and so on.
Yeah, but I think this is like a unique problem that we face with AMMs, right? If you had on-chain order books that were very efficient, this problem would partly be completely gone because in my opinion, if we hopefully we'll see L2s that are way faster, can scale to hundreds and hundreds of TPS, and then we would see on-chain order books, and in that case, it will be a whole different issue that we're going to be facing hopefully soon. And if that happens, I think that's going to be very beneficial for the entire ecosystem.
Yeah, I mean, one innovation here, I know we have to probably switch to another topic, but I don't know if you guys know Kyber, but that's an interesting innovation there because they changed the fees. And it's not just about charging as little possible fees as you can, but if you're able to move the fees for when people really want it, you charge a lot. And then when people don't want it, you know, you don't charge that much. I think maybe those kinds of innovations could help out.
Sure, I mean, dynamic fees I think are available on Balancer at this point. You can probably play around with that. And then you can even play with things like changing the swap fee depending on where the peg is. So you can go like one-way swap will be more expensive than the other way, and then sort of like have an entire scheme around this.
We also have a Maverick fan.
Yeah, yeah.
We should probably mention Maverick.
Of course. No,
Sure.
but for the dynamic fees, I like the idea. But if we go back to a situation of like many people coming one day to swap, like you don't fulfill the need because essentially you're going to tell one to those guys, no, it's 1% fee. Yeah, I give you 1 rate, but 1% fee. So you give me 0.99.
But if you
rate.
really want the liquid, I mean, someone's got to hold the bag.
But
you know, what I mean? And
to
if
put
you-
like to put it in another thing so you understand, it's like, okay, I have too many people in my nightclub. How can I manage people? Well, it's pretty simple. Tell the bouncer to be increasingly more aggressive the more the club is filled. So if you come to the club and there is 300 people inside, the bouncer will just like punch your face. Like,
I would
yes,
like
it
to see
works.
that. That would sound funny.
You know, it works. You will have like contained the inflow in your clubs. But at what cost? You just punch a ton of faces.
Well, that's how they regulate commodities markets, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Like yeah.
I think we can do a bit better, but it is definitely a way to balance input-output. But yeah, I would go more towards solutions that can dynamically rebalance liquidity to adjust those very tough market conditions. And that's part of my interest for Maverick here, because it can manage this.
So I think we got a good understanding of the challenges when it comes to decentralization, also around liquidity or lack of liquidity. Maybe we shift gears a bit now and we talk about challenges when it comes to censorship resistance. What are the challenges there?
I mean, we can go back to the four.
I think we covered a little bit on that, but
Yeah, I think so.
I mean, so, okay, in terms of collateral, I think we discussed it a little bit,
About
but we can go
liquidity.
deeper. We talked about liquidity, and then we have governance and technical risk. Essentially, we can go a bit deeper on that.
bridging for Frax and Mai is very important
Part of
because
the technical, yeah.
they're constantly changing, they're constantly getting hacked, and they all suck. I mean, they're great. XLR and Stargate are great. I never said that they sucked. But like, there's a lot of them that used to be big and now don't exist. And so ability to change and be upgradable is very important for us cross-chain protocols. And so I don't even know if you could make a immutable, like you can't change, like into a cross-chain project outside of the L2s. Like if you're looking at alt L1s, because multi-chain and then you're done, you know? Multi-chain hack for those things.
Yeah, that's exactly why Frax built our own bridge with Frax Ferry, because of all the hacks going on. And with the whole multi-chain debacle happening, we were fine because, you know, none of the Frax was affected.
Yeah, I mean, for us, we aggregate bridges. So when we started first being cross-chain, like we saw the bridges and we're like, no, this is not going to be final state.
They're also rickety.
Yeah, so we kind of like aggregate and we give them allocations just like we give vaults allocations. And so we had multi-chain. In like 20 minutes, it was delisted. And no, we didn't have a loss because of they couldn't bridge my.
Yeah, I think like diversifying the risk there is important, but I think like we've seen with every single cross-chain protocol, eventually we'll have some sort of problem. So
Not layer 0 or Axelar, they're perfect.
hope so.
Kind of walk back the.
Yeah, so I mean, cross-chain communication between different L1s is technically impossible. So you always have to trust somebody. And the question is like, is it worth trusting somebody? And how do you want to have everybody on every chain affected by this? Or do you want to isolate the risk between those people who actually bridge themselves and you offload the risk to them? Or do you want it to be split across every single user? I think those are very important questions.
Well, then we get outside of the kind of like technical. I'm more into like the finance side. And you can do that. Like, I think if you're able to maintain the same amount of debt or close to the same amount of debt as circulating supply on each chain, if there's a huge problem, like chain killing problem with a chain, you can isolate it by cutting off the bridge. And it's not a contagion. Because if you think about it, the accounting closes the loop within each chain. And I think that's something that our DAO is currently discussing a lot because of all the chains that we're on.
Yeah, and there are several ways to go cross-chain after protocol level. Indeed, you run into those issues. For us, they're a bit more remote because immutable code means you cannot mint LUSD, but on mainnet. So essentially, all of this is impossible for liquidity. But it doesn't mean you can't do things. So, for instance, you can still bridge tokens. And here it's more a risk management approach, you know, in terms of which chains do you support an LUSD liquidity on. And then also the infrastructure you will use. So yeah, on this front, it's still trying to minimize the scope as much as possible. So standard bridge only for the highest quality of layer 2s only. And that's kind of how we go around this. But
one thing though to note, there's like a lot of people, like Stani mentioned this during his talk before this, that the way we get the masses is by getting the people. Yeah. And the problem is there are not a lot of people that can borrow on Ethereum. There are not people that can afford that. Like right now, I mean, we have 14,000 users. versus like the most used CDP on MakerDAO, I mean on Ethereum is MakerDAO at 2,700 users. And so that's a huge difference. But the problem is like, yeah, like they're not going to go to Ethereum. So you got to go to the chains that they're on. And if you go to the chains that they're on, you're going to have to concede a little bit. You're going to have to like break the rules.
So actually there is a cheat code we managed to pull once, and we're looking into pulling a second time. And it's essentially those batch pooled integration native to an L2 that interact with the L1 protocol. So to be a bit more explicit, your users is on a Zk sync based L2 most likely, a Zk based, sorry, not Zk sync necessarily. And what happens is it can use his ETH or whatever, but for liquidity ETH there, to interact with the liquidity protocol, but from his L2. So it will supply his ETH, borrow his LUSD, do something with his LUSDs, and essentially in the background, this will just manage troves on the layer 1, batch the transactions from everybody using on the L2, and replicate them on the layer 1. So at the end of the day, they're interacting with the L1 protocol, but from a source on the L2. So there are some challenges as to how you accomplish this bridge. The main one is the batching logic. Essentially, for now, most of the integrations, they operate 2 big fat troves. So, you know, because of course they cannot replicate each user trove of the guy that put like borrow $5 on the L2 is not going to have a trove on mainnet, obviously. But so essentially the way they go is they offer you 2 options in terms of troves. They have like a more degen trove and a safer trove, you know, maybe one that is at 250% and another at 300%. And so when you get into the app, you can choose which one you want. So essentially the cost of this implementation is a bit less flexibility on the user side, because now you cannot pick exactly the amount you want to borrow. You just like, you have 2 options, whether either you like them and you harness them or you don't. But you know, it's still a massive improvement from you can't do anything from an L2 to know you can interact with native protocol.
It's better than nothing.
Yeah.
Sure. I think one of the key issues that we faced with Raft with building like a cross-chain strategy is just liquidity. Because if you don't have liquidity for the collateral types on other chains, then it's very difficult to perform liquidations there, and you're going to be putting the entire protocol at risk. You have to impose mint caps, you have to impose all sorts of caps on the protocol level and both at the user level to make sure that everything works properly. And it actually, that adds to the whole censorship resistant thing, because you will have to have a centralized control and of those mint caps yourself, and then perhaps, you know, raise them later in the future. If the liquidity drops on that chain because adoption dries up, then that you run into a whole sort of a different issue, because then there's not enough liquidity natively to liquidate all of the positions. But I think it all depends on what sort of collateral types you have. If you have ETH, obviously there's more liquidity there. On L2s as well, so it should be fine. But I think like if you want to take liquid staking tokens, for example, as collateral, it's going to be more challenging.
I mean, I do think there should be mint caps everywhere. Like I remember even like when we were Max Spain, everything was falling. There was like that Chinese billionaire that had a vault, I think in MakerDAO. Everybody was watching it because that guy got liquidated. I mean, it was Armageddon. ETH was going to really crash. Everybody was going to get liquidated. So maybe we should do some risk management there. I mean, not everybody's going to be happy with it, because if you really want everything to be like permissionless, there's no kind of like a room for this kind of risk management. But if we want to make the broader space safer from these black swans, we might need some mint caps in Ethereum.
Yeah, I mean, it reminds me of a chat I was having this morning, a bit sidetracked, but also very on track, you'll see, Bianca. We're talking about circuit breakers. So I don't know if you guys are familiar with that, but it's like an EIP that came out, still in discussion stage. But the idea is to have those kind of circuit breakers, as they call them. So it's essentially, they will pause a protocol or a bridge or something if it sees more like than, let's say, 20% of its total TVL outflow over a short amount of time. And I was telling him I'm very opposed to that. Like at the philosophical level, I am disturbed by this very idea. And it took a while, but he finally understood. Because essentially my whole point was like, yes, I want more user safety. Don't get me wrong. I don't like seeing users getting wrecked. And we agree on that. But the problem is with those devices is you increase user safety at the expense of recreating a central point of control. Because, okay, for instance, this circuit breaker that he was describing to me was algorithmically triggered. So based on an algorithm, just monitoring data, and if there is more than this threshold, protocol is stopped. But then they were the one deciding when the protocol goes back online. So then I was like, okay, so now I can bribe you to launch back the protocol when I want you to launch it back, so that I make money on my long or short or whatever. But you do see that all those devices, they add a central point of control. And we can then know from our experience in the real world, look at all the system you have in the real world where you have a central point of control. You give him enough time, you end up with a corrupted central point of control, especially if the system is managing a lot of value.
Yeah, this is interesting. We just had a conversation with some people here at the Stable Summit about different solutions that notify you in advance of a hack. And I'm like, that's great, but once that was actually that we get notification 1 minute in advance, then there's no way to shutting it down. So that would basically be of not much use to the protocols that are not that centralized. So I think that's, partly ties in with your thoughts.
Yeah, it's kind of like just to wrap on this, the clash between two ways of building, essentially. One way that is, we won't build any kind of showstoppers or circuit breakers or whatsoever, but we will modelize heavily the protocol, agent-based modeling, and a lot of very fancy stuff to essentially map how people will behave, map the protocol against various market situations and so on, and be confident enough that you can launch this without the ability to change the code, and it will be fine. And then the other school of thought is, okay, let's build something, and we'll adapt to the market, adjust, but essentially the problem or the challenge here is that you need to introduce some entity or whatsoever able to decide and implement those changes. So usually a governance, and as I was saying earlier, then this governance becomes, whether you like it or not, an attack vector.
And I think on the topic of censorship resistance, something that's very important is obfuscating as much blacklist risk as possible. So instead of just having a bunch of USDC backing you, at Frax, most of the USDC is being put to work in Curve AMOs. I like to say, Frax isn't backed by USDC, it's backed by DeFi, it's backed by these AMOs. And so unless Circle blacklist Curve and destroys all of DeFi, then that's fine.
So we talked so far a lot about the technical side. Let's shift a bit gears and think more in a philosophical way. Let's say tomorrow we overcome all these challenges, the technical challenges, and we achieve a truly censorship-resistant currency. Do you think the regulations would step in? Do you think maybe they would restrict in some way the use of such a currency? And I'm not talking here on the technical side. I'm more talking about possible, let's say, penalties. Like if you interact with currency X, then you're gonna get sanctioned.
Yeah, I mean, they can try. At the technical level, there is nothing they can do. So then they are free to declare, I don't know, a terrorist, anyone using a censorship, a currency that they deem too censorship resilient. But even that will not deter usage. I think a good example of that is Monero, So Monero is, if you own it, or like a lot of exchanges consider you at risk if you have interacted with Monero, or even Tornado Cash, like you're flagged by default by any kind of automated on-chain monitoring services if you have an interaction with Tornado Cash. So, but it doesn't prevent people from using Tornado Cash, because when they need privacy, Tornado Cash provide that, and they keep it in their mind, like, okay, this address that I'm going to use for off-ramping, obviously I'm not going to fund it through Tornado Cash, or be mindful of whatever I do, but like if I'm just looking to transfer assets between wallets that are interacting purely on-chain, then Tornado Cash is fine. I don't care whether those services won't serve me.
Yeah, maybe there's only so much the law enforcement can do here. I think if we have seen many instances of IPFS-based front ends. I think that's a very important thing. And if we, obviously, because of the nature of Ethereum and other blockchains, if you deploy a dApp, it's going to be there forever. So I think if we actually manage to get to that point where we have an oracle-less stablecoin that maintains a stable peg, and somehow the liquidity issue is also solved. So we managed to cross all these boundaries that we have, which is, I think, light years away from that. At that point, this discussion will become a little more relevant. But I think we've seen that on the market side, people actually do seem to care quite a lot about what is banned and what is not. And I think the Tornado Cash usage has dropped significantly since it's been declared, whatever it was declared at the time. But I think, so people try to comply, but obviously there will be a segment of the population that just don't care.
Yeah, and it comes down to, at the end of the day, money is a social technology. We all use it. We all need it. And And so if like, you could have the most immutable currency on the face of the earth, but OFAC sanctions it, then, I'm not touching it. I'm not sure about you guys, but
I think it depends on how geopolitics goes, right? Like today, the U.S. has this power to like say what happens, right? Europe, to a lesser extent, also has. Perhaps that changes, right? Because you have these different systems that are built separate from each other. Like China doesn't use so much of the payment system of the U.S. They use Union Pay. They have their own thing, Tencent, whatever. So perhaps the global South makes their own payment system that's outside of the purview of the U.S. And then you can kind of choose your regulatory, jurisdiction in a place that is more favorable of you. And I think where if we are actually creating something that's good for users and protects people, which is the most important part, more so than being censorship resistant, we have a duty to protect people from losing their funds. Otherwise, why are we making this, right? And so if we're doing that, there was going to be a government that says, you know what, that's a good idea. And I think if we have that, then we can work with people to make the world what we want it to be.
If I can jump still on a philosophical level, but because it's a bit underserved, I would say, in awareness. So a topic we touched a little bit about the code immutability, because it's one of the ways to achieve this censorship resistance. But there are other benefits that comes with it that I think are also part of, at least for me, what excites me with DeFi and what drew me in. And it's literally that the rules of the protocol cannot change. So it's a bit of this transparent, honest contract that cannot rug you, So imagine you go to a bank and you borrow under certain terms, and like the contract they give you is literally there is nothing they can do to change it. So if they tell you you're paying 2% interest rate, for a fact you're paying 2% interest rate, and they cannot raise it.
But the problem there is like you can't rug the people, but the world can rug you, because while you might not change, the world does change. And so let's say, on a low level, if something happens to Chainlink or Tether or whatever, on a high level, what if Ethereum dies? I know we're at an Ethereum conference, but what if that's not the future, right? Like it's an extreme example, but it's supposed to exemplify the fact that you cannot plan for everything. And so, I think it's very important to be very honest and forthcoming about the risks. And it's impossible to say that because you cannot change, users are safe. I don't think that's
not the point I'm making. I'm making the point that you can provide additional guarantees to your users by having your code being immutable, because you remove an incomprehensible layer of risk that you have as soon as you're being mutable on a technical level, but also at a philosophical level. You provide a level of guarantees to your users that is unprecedented, either in DeFi, apart by other immutable protocol, but also especially in traditional banking that is known to have terms that can be quite fluctuating and hard to navigate. That's all.
And I hope we're talking on like philosophical terms about immutability here, because we still have the Oracle, all sorts of other problems. But if we actually can do the immutable, where we don't have to rely on any party at all, then yes, I agree with that.
Yeah, because anything could change. Ethereum forked not too long ago.
Sure, yeah.
Things can change.
Yeah, on a higher level, like obviously we tie all of our projects to the Ethereum blockchain, and then once that breaks, then we're done.
I love Ethereum. Please
Yes.
don't tell Vitalik. This stays with us. It's not being recorded, right? It's okay, good.
Yeah.
Like a little
I think
chat.
as long as you're in a dollar-pegged world, you're always going to be tied to the real world somehow. Unless like the Fed starts minting cryptographically on chain, which I don't see happening anytime soon. And so like with taking that into account,
I think on a philosophical level, what would be a really big problem for all of us is if the US raised interest rates to like 20%. If they did that,
then we're switching currencies, man.
There you
I'm
go.
going to the yen, sorry.
Yeah,
Or yuan,
new
sorry.
stablecoin.
Still on the hypothetical side, like assuming tomorrow we have this magical, truly censorship-resistant currency, and it gets widespread adoption. What risk do you see with this potential widespread adoption, and how we can address those risks?
I don't like using risk for that. I would call this the price of freedom. Literally, because like, what are the risks? People are going to be like, oh yeah, you will have, I don't know, terrorism, or people people declared as terrorists by the United States, using that to transfer assets between one country to another, or you might have other use cases that you disapprove of, or laws is saying that are not legal. But at the end of the day, you know, we know the other side of that spectrum again. The other side of that spectrum is what? Is give us control over the system because we want to catch the pedophiles and the terrorists. And we promise you it's only going to be for the pedophiles and the terrorists. And then what happens in every single situation, confirmed by like 300 years of human history, oh, surprisingly, we're using a pedophile law to go after, I don't know, a guy that is just, you know, a bit too much on the left or on the right end of the spectrum. Or, oh, no, we have eco-terrorism because, you know, we want to use the terrorist law to silence and censor another part of the population. So the thing is, those type of control systems, they will always end up being abused. And it's not like, trust me, bro, on this, is look around you. Like any kind of control system you see in the real world is systematically abused. So the whole vision is kind of like, let's try to build a system without those control systems, without those censorship mediums, so that at least we have this additional guarantee. I'm not saying it's the only way, but I'm just saying in my book, that's the most credible way by virtue of seeing every single control system ever built systematically abused, given enough time.
I think just in general, like if you see stablecoins and people trying to ban it, I think we're way ahead of our time here because you can actually track every sort of transaction way better than you can do in traditional systems, for example, cash. So I don't think there's any sort of reason if the government is thinking rationally, which they might not, but in most of the cases,
When has
like
the government
yeah,
thought, right?
yeah, I think like it wouldn't be that big of an issue.
I totally agree with token rights here. I think that the world in general, I think we've seen governments in each side, freedom versus autocracy. Autocracy is always on the side of safety. Freedom is always on the side of choice. I have to say, freedom wins because I'm not going to trust somebody to tell me what's supposed to make me safe. I mean, read anything by George Orwell, right?
Going back to actually what we have nowadays, what is each of your projects, like each of you kind of represent a project here. What is each of your projects doing in terms of censorship resistance? We saw that we're not there yet. We don't have like this perfect solution, but what are your projects doing in terms of getting closer to that ideal scenario?
I guess you can sit tight, Mr. Immutable. But on our side is... Jokes aside, I'll let you talk after, I promise. For us, we're in a lot of chains. There's no stablecoin that you can mint on as many chains as we're on. There's no DAO that's available on all these chains. And that comes with a huge problem, and that's automating the protocol fully. And because you have to trust message transfers. I mean, we're in a lot of Altel 1s where the bridges are not as trustworthy as like the L2s. So how do you get the like messages across? And so right now we are deploying an open source, free to use for anybody, module on Safe, where any project that wants to build cross-chain is going to be able to connect their deployments across the different chains to allow for some sort of automation. If they want to connect that to a DAO, they can, but it doesn't have to be. And I think tooling like that's going to be very important. We particularly are trusting Chainlink just because we already trust it with like, you know, our collateral, so there's not additional assumptions there with like the whole CCIP. And I think that's going to be very important for our protocol to strive to be more censorship resistant. Obviously, there's no such thing as completely censorship resistant.
I think Uniswap commissioned a very nice report about cross-chain communication, and they made a nice comparison of all the bridges. So that's something that we're also checking out to see if we can do some sort of cross-chain communication that would probably be limited to governance as opposed to actually bridging assets of value. I think that's a little bit further off for us. But what we're doing at Raft, I think we're believing in like a progressive decentralization. So we have launched just only a month ago. We got respectable 60 million TVL in that time frame. But what we're trying to do here is start off with a somewhat more centralized multi-sig to take control of the key decisions that aren't obviously not limited to the key protocol working. So we don't have a pause function and things like that. But what we're trying to do is hand over those important things to the DAO at a later point, and then put limits on those decisions about who can make those decisions, what the time limit will be, whether there will be some sort of a time lock and everything else. And then once that sort of develops from there, then we can see how we can develop a cross-chain strategy of our own. But I think the important thing here is that we're dealing with collateral types that are very new. So it's not ETH, it's not USDC, it's all sorts of other things, and we need to keep a closer eye, and we need to keep a little bit more control over those things, at least for now, until those decisions can be handed over to a DAO at a later time. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
That's a joke.
I've sprinkled hints at Frax, what we're doing to go more towards decentralization. For example, with FraxGov, bringing ultimate power to token holders, how AMOs and backing works, where Frax is backed by DeFi. And another thing with Frax v3 coming out is lessening the reliance on USDC as the reference peg and collateral in favor of a sovereign, true USD peg.
Do you guys let your devs sleep? I don't know. I feel like Frax is always coming out with something.
Yeah, no, they're truly the SEAL Team 6 of crypto.
I've never seen them at a conference, and I really think DeFi Dev has them chained to their decks or something.
It's not me.
Yeah.
Sam's just always in the chat. Like the
Always-
most
always on
accessible person in the Telegram chat, which is important. Like keeping in touch with your community, always being there, and that's your like pulse.
And I feel bad, please.
Yeah.
Tell us. how
Actually, it
is your-
seems like you missed the news, so I'm going to break it to you.
Oh, the V2, the V2.
Yes, you know.
Upgradability,
So he's
man,
right.
let's go.
We do like chilling on our ass, just watching the supply grow, and we can change the code. It's really nice. But when we do that, we also like think about how can we build better. And out of that reflection came an idea for V2 that Robert presented yesterday. I guess I can give you like quick pointers, but it's a completely different model from V1 that will coexist with V1. And I guess the gist of it is it's a reserve-backed stablecoin, so that's why it's a widely different model. And the other bigger novelty would be that it offers solutions for people looking to leverage ETH or LSDs in a pretty cost-effective way, but also with interesting guarantees regarding the pricing power. So yeah.
I feel like you were watching everyone fork you guys, and you were like, "Man, this LST stuff is too much fun. Like we gotta get into it."
Yeah,
I mean, it's been pretty popular. It's been pretty popular, right?
So again, bro, watch his V2 talk because you missed the keyword reserve-backed. I don't think any of the forked are reserve-backed. Liquidity, by definition, is also not
I'm
reserve-backed.
saying it's a good move. I'm not
new
saying you're
model.
forking yourselves, but I think people definitely like LSDs.
Yeah, that's a big ask.
I hate that they changed the name.
Yeah.
LSDs was way better.
No, for me, it's LSD. Like,
Yeah,
I'll
we've been
die on
saying
this
LSD.
here.
Yeah.
of course.
We take our LSDs, we stake them with some acid, and this is how DeFi goes. If you're not happy about it, you can go back to TartFi.
Yeah, Web 2.
Okay, going back to Benjamin's point about being available on different chains, do you think it's possible to have such a truly censorship-resistant currency on many chains? And if so, how? How do we achieve that many chain compatibility?
I think it's kind of related to the point I made earlier about there's always trade-offs, right? If you want something, you lose something else. Like, I think one major thing that we won by being on all these chains is that we are completely diversified in terms of our counterparty. We have 14,000 people lending on my. The next best is MakerDAO at 2,700. And so I think that's something that's good. I think that's something that helps us. Obviously, it doesn't overcome everything maybe that we exchange for. But definitely with new infrastructure like CCIP from Chainlink, I think we get closer to something that is more censorship resistant. And everybody trusts Chainlink. I mean, Chainlink has been live for a while. But I hope that as crypto continues, we have more interoperability, not just between the L2s, but maybe different L1s. Maybe the narrative's not there, who knows? But from our point of view, we want to be able to allow users to choose what chain they're on, what assets they're borrowing against. And yeah, more infrastructure, I guess, is my answer. I hope to get more of that.
And I think as important as the stablecoin is the chain itself. Like you have BNB chain, which is one of the most widely used chains. If your stablecoin's on there, BNB as a chain is much more centralized and itself is an attack vector. So there's ways to think about it as well.
Yeah, but because the thing is we're on BNB chain too, and it's like a constant debate in the DAO. But at the same time, those people need
that's what they use.
You know what I mean?
Yeah,
That's the thing, and that's we talk about trade-offs. That's one of the trade-offs.
Yeah, and if we're really trying to service people, they have a lot of users, right? I mean, Polygon too. Polygon, I think, is the most users, right? I mean, there's bots everywhere. So
Yeah.
Depends what you count as users.
yeah, it's hard to tell. But in general, I mean, this idea of like having a shop everywhere so everybody can access this kind of stablecoin is important. If you're able to isolate, as you mentioned, the risk.
Yeah, but you can have a different sort of a stablecoin cater to different audiences. So you can have different collateral types on different chains. I think like the needs of a BNB user is probably way different to the needs of somebody who is on Ethereum mainnet and wants to mint like $1 million worth of stablecoins. So you can cater the product to all these like different users as well.
Yeah, you kind of front-run me on this one, David, because I was about to suggest as the most realistic way I would see a stablecoin on several chains achieving some highest form of censorship resistance actually goes back to sorts of many stablecoins, not just one. So essentially maybe a kind of factory of protocol that ships a stablecoin specific to each chain, and then they are designed to interact with one another, but they're segregated, you know? So you have the ETH protocol outputting the ETH stable, you have the ARB protocol outputting the ARB stable, and you have mechanism to make it as easy as possible for a guy that has ETH stable on mainnet to go to ARB stable on Arbitrum, but you keep the basket separated, essentially.
This is what we're doing exactly. So we're considering deploying on different chains, but those stablecoins will be called something else, and they would be a completely separate system by itself. There would be some sort of value transfer for incentives and everything else, but aside from that, the stablecoin would live on its own chain, on all separate chains. So I think like we're just going towards like a multi-chain future here, as opposed to a cross-chain one, which seems a little bit of a safer route.
But I would say that that's kind of what we have today. I mean, if you're able, like I said, to have the circulating supply be similar to the debt on each chain, they're essentially separate deployments, right? And then you're able to some extent, limit the exposure that each chain has to each other. And it's very hard to just have a stablecoin on one chain for many reasons. One, because the price is not arbitrage as well, right? You're having to bootstrap again every time. And we're on many chains, and we've seen many stablecoins come up and down. And outside of Ethereum, they've all failed. I mean, I can't name a single stablecoin outside of Ethereum that's only outside, or maybe predominantly outside, that's been able to get on Aave, right? That's been able to last more than a year, well over, without any like kind of drama or people losing millions of dollars, right? And that comes back to the fact that there is a huge network effect of having the same stablecoin, because you can get concessions, right? You go to a new chain, you're like, oh, am I, you know, like, oh, we'll make an LP for you.
Sure. I agree.
You know,
it's a conscious design choice, you know, like which one is better? Do you want to share the same liquidity pool, easier bootstrapping, or do you want to have separate stablecoins that maintain their, you know, separate collateral, liquidation mechanism, everything else on the separate chains, or do you want to somehow tie all of them together and then share one liquidity pool, which is way better from network effects, and it's way easier to bootstrap on a different chain if you're using the same thing.
But please come. We need more people outside of Ethereum. I mean, we have Frax. They're great. We work a lot on. I forgot you guys are also outside. But you're an Ethereum mainly a stablecoin. Do you mint outside of Ethereum?
No, it's all Ethereum.
It's all Ethereum.
Yeah.
Okay.
Right.
We're at the end of the time, unfortunately, but I would like to open the floor for any questions from the audience. And I already see a couple of hands.
Yeah, thanks. I actually have even two questions, but since there are too many, I'll just ask one, the more provocative one. Yeah, we're talking about censorship resistance, right? And I believe, guys, you know your users, but what's your take on the actual value proposition for the users in the censorship resistance of your products? What I say is that definitely it's a good thing, right? But do you think that's the main value proposition of what you do? Or users come for some other features, like say yield or anything else? Like how really important is this really important thing for the actual users?
I think what you're trying to describe is what is the monetary premium of a stablecoin? Why are people using a stablecoin? Because they want to use it for its inherent usefulness. So like right now, like the stablecoin with the highest monetary premium is Tether. People aren't expecting any yield from it. People are just using it to transact. And I think what all of us are trying to do is increase the monetary premium of all our stablecoins. Now, for our ETH-peg stablecoin at Frax ETH, you can actually see it being measured with all the Frax ETH that isn't staked and Frax ETH that is in the curve pool. It's just people just using it for its inherent usefulness.
I think it's you have to do like a multi-factor analysis of like what is important to the user, and you can like rank all of these things like capital efficiency, cost of minting, and then censorship resistance on like a scale, and then you'll see like, I think in the Ethereum community in general, we probably overestimate the importance of censorship resistance based on how much people want it. If we see the market cap of DAI, you know, that's not that censorship resistant at all. You can see like there's all sorts of regulatory issues there. The DAO is holding government bonds, you know, what can go wrong? You see the market cap is way higher. So that's something that people don't seem to care about that much. Although we're all trying to push an agenda here, like our own.
My stablecoin, please.
Yes.
Not financial advice.
Yeah, maybe just to build on that, it's also something that happens is systems that are able to achieve a high censorship resistance, it's kind of a consequence of other choices that tend to make for a pretty sturdy protocol. So sometimes it's really hard to determine if users were just looking, you know, for censorship resistance, or if they just wanted to essentially minimize that technical risk. But I would agree with what has been said in terms of, I would like it to be 100% of the decision factors of users. But I can tell you from, let's say, stats from the Bryce Institute, with my stats from chatting with hundreds of liquidity users, I would say it's probably about 30% max, putting together censorship resistance and overall resilience of the protocol. Like, I put ETH in there, and I know I am unlikely to lose them, or less likely than with other protocols. But indeed, other factors like the cost and the yield they're going to be able to put with the stablecoin are big ones. And what is cool is when all three converges. So I think for us at Liquidity, we have a fit with long-term tech-savvy users looking to leverage their ETH, because all of three kind of converge together. It's a resilient protocol. If you're in for the long term, your borrowing cost will be a fraction of what you get anywhere else. And you have decent yield opportunities that are quite synergetic with an ETH bull mindset, let's say, on LUSD. So the whole package together makes it really nice for someone who is looking to leverage long-term his asset and really doesn't want to lose them.
I know we don't have a lot of time, but I really like your question, because I think a lot of people focus so much on the code, on the tech, and they forget that it's not just D, it's also Phi. And so it needs to be a good deal for people. I mean, people need to have some sort of like value getting from it. And so if you structure it as a business, as a product that you're making for what they want, and people want yield, people want to be able to hodl, people want to be able to borrow at low rates, that's what people want. And that's what we offer. Obviously, you have to check it yourself. This is not financial advice. Yeah.
Maybe let's take one more question.
Yeah, I think that's a great question as well for all the people using USDT on Tron.
I don't know what they're doing, man.
Or USDT.
We're all wondering with you.
Yeah.
Okay, but so my question is, like, when you launch a stablecoin, there are three, on a high level, there's three main ways to get liquidity for your stablecoin, which are bribing or renting or buying. So especially for you guys that are about to launch a new coin or have just launched one, which strategy did you opt for, and how did you like approach this decision?
This is war with every single project that has a token out here. Do you think there is one weapon at war you will leave off the table? Be like, oh no, I don't like swords. For me, it's like, you know, any tool you give me, if you invent a new, even more convoluted way of raising liquidity, I will look at it, because it's another tool and it's a competitive landscape against every single other player. I know we're all gonna make it vibes here, and yeah, sure. But when it comes to liquidity, it's a limited supply. You know, there is not infinity of CRV. The question is, what is my share of CRV for the week, essentially? And you know, your share you get at the expense of the other.
No, but
So
what I'm saying is every dollar you allocate towards buying liquidity is a dollar you don't allocate towards bribing for that liquidity.
I think
right?
you bring up a good question, because it's different for older, like MakerDAO. Yeah, it's very different from MakerDAO that it is for all of us that are newer stablecoins, and definitely different for you that you came in during a different time. And I think for us, it's partnerships, man. I mean, Cheetah would not be where it is today if it weren't for partnerships. We don't have whales, we didn't raise capital. Nobody's pumping our TVL. There's no like funds. Like the person that has the most TVL, I think it's like 1% over TVL. And so because of all that, you really have to focus on going to each chain, going to the DEX and saying, how can I provide value to you, and how you can provide value to me? And you kind of make these deals. And these deals sometimes go well, sometimes go wrong. You kind of like package it with some of the bribing, but dude, the voting incentive stuff is like bad. I mean, it's not that good because if you think about it, like a lot of it doesn't last. Now there's some new things like Maverick, and I will let you talk about Maverick. Don't you worry.
No, but not even.
But
a lot of lists don't last.
In the
but some
majority,
do.
in the majority of it, like nothing will last longer than the partnerships.
I think this question is particularly relevant to us because we've just launched our stablecoin R, and I think in our case we don't have a native token to incentivize with, so it's very different. So we have a couple.
Somehow you get LDO. I don't know.
Yeah,
I
mean,
popping it up.
yeah, I mean, partnerships is one part of it, right? But we also get. We also have to use our own money to incentivize, and then if you're using your own protocol's money to incentivize, then you have to make very careful decisions about what you want to incentivize and how much money you want to put and where do you get the most buck for your money. And I think this was part of our decision to partner with Balancer because the bribes there, you get more money for every dollar being spent.
You get like 1.4, man.
1.4, 1.6, something like that. I think
you can get 2 if you incentivize with me and Frax.
Yeah, we just
we
like split it, right?
That's 2x.
We split the bribes and with 3.2.
Oh, let's do it. All downvoted.
But yeah,
Yep.
I guess my answer was like, you need to use every tools anyway. Like an optimized strategy will mix bribing, partnership, voting, direct liquidity mining incentive, whatever is relevant. Like,
You
know,
should
to
see
achieve
me
the best.
talking Bryce
result.
and Nader from Frax, just like out in the abouts in like random chains, like, you know. Okay, what's it gonna be, this guys? What's gonna happen?
And you know, it's even like, I get a question. I think it was Kila one day. He was like, hey, Bryce, what is your liquidity efficiency on that chain? Like, bro, like, you know, this is like trading secret at this point. Everybody, like, you do your own math.
We know your cost of capital. We know your cost of, I don't know your, actually, you're a pretty high cost of
It's better
capital.
that you don't.
You're spending a lot in bribes, dude.
Yes,
Yeah,
Frax
you
is a
have-
big spender as long as Raft.
They are 20K a week, dude.
I mean, the two of them are overspending by a wide margin. You guys are a bit better, but still not there yet.
We're stingy, bro. But we make more money than we spend on emissions by a factor
Yeah.
of 2. So
You guys are way better though because you can incentivize a stability pool, and by doing that, it's basically you cut the cost in half. So if you can get higher TVL just by doing single-sided incentives, and you don't have to incentivize the other half, which is like DAI in our case.
But you don't want to do that
If you want to
you're
do
too
TVL,
small.
but like obviously it's
if you're too small,
different goals, right?
yeah, if you're too small and you have most of your market cap in a
Liquidity
stability
incentive,
pool,
Right.
then it's very bad. I remember there was a fork, or let's call a tri-fork, I don't know if it's fork, a Polyquity on Polygon, and it was like, I think 90%.
On stability pool, yeah.
Yeah, so if like little trades could destroy the protocol, and it eventually caused bad things to happen to that protocol.
Sure.
All right. I remember there was a third hand raised.
Thanks, guys. This has been very entertaining and super informative.
Told ya.
I think I have a kind of piggyback question off of that. As like a lot more L2s are being developed, do you all have any strategies for how you will be maintaining liquidity to avoid situations like you just described? That's the question.
I'm sorry, what was the question?
So liquidity being the scarce resource that it is, lots of new L2s showing up, bridging is a risk factor. Do you all have any strategies or ways you're approaching that?
Oh, make them pay for it. But it's complicated because everybody wants to launch an L2. Nobody really has an answer of what that L2 actually is supposed to do, other than it's a better scaling solution than the other one, right? And so, yeah, it's complicated. And from our point of view, we're like the cross-chain stable. So like we want people to be able to bridge in and out. But like fragmented liquidity destroys your cost of capital because you have to have way more percentage of your market cap in LPs. And so, yeah, I mean, for us, it's, again, partnerships. I said it a little crassly a couple of seconds ago, but yeah, partnerships.
Yeah, I guess, yeah, definitely agree. BD side of things, and then especially for new chains, I would be part of, you know, the discussions. It's like, okay, what DEXs do you have on your chain, and like, can you connect us with them? Are they willing to support or things like that? It's actually a big decision factor in even deciding whether or not this chain is interesting or not. Because, you know, it's really like step one of a new chain strategy is, okay, you got your token here. Now you need liquidity. Now you have liquidity, you go for more advanced use case. Now you have liquidity and sustained volume, you go for a chain collateral, and you can go for even more intricate use case. That's kind of like the 4 layers. But liquidity is really like the lifeblood of that. You can't do any of the others unless you have sufficient liquidity.
I think protocols should definitely try to get co-incentives from all these other chains that they want to go on. The part of the reason for that is not just to get free money, but also because LPs on other chains expect higher yields. So they're not happy with a 6% base yield. They want a 16% or 20% because it's a more risky chain. It's a new chain. There's a new DEX. Nobody audited it yet. Like all sorts of issues with it. And then it's not a good way to spend our money to incentivize liquidity there, instead of incentivizing on Ethereum, because it's just going to cost you more. So
yeah, I don't know why. I don't know. If you're just on Ethereum and you're giving loans on Ethereum, there is less of a reason to have liquidity in all these chains. Like for us, like we make loans on those chains. So like we need there to be liquidity on those chains. But if you're mainly on Ethereum and you're not giving loans everywhere else, it could present a threat. Because if you have too much liquidity on these L2s and there are liquidation events, there might not be enough liquidity on L1 to suffice for your liquidations. Now it depends on how you do. If you have a big liquidity pool,
it's a factor.
you,
It's accounted for. Yeah. You want to keep it within certain ranges, but you have to keep in mind also it goes back to the social dimension of a stable, right? So why is LUSD on Arbitrum and OP? Because they brought it here and they asked for it. Essentially, initially in the early vision, cross-chain wasn't really considered, but then there was appetite and demand.
the pool is quite nice.
Yeah.
My LUSD is pretty
good. Also, we're doing good. So yeah, the questions become more, how can we fulfill that demand without putting the protocol at risk? And there are ways to address that. So we went with it.
Yeah, I'm just waiting for Frax Chain to come out. No, but I'm just kidding. But
I think we're all waiting for Frax Chain to come out.
But it comes down to what's going on the other L2s, what incentives, what are the DEXs, like what you were saying. It's all about partnerships and how you work together to build the ecosystem and build liquidity.
I think it's the social element is very important. I think like if you want to, what is the stablecoin for? Do you want it to? Is it mainly for leverage on the native chain? Is it for other people to just use and spend as payments on L2s? And I think like if you want to diversify your user base a little bit and just branch out, then it's definitely good to incentivize at least a little bit of liquidity on other chains, especially on L2, so people can actually buy it. Those people who are priced out from actually minting it on the main chain, and you don't have a minting mechanism on the other chain, at least they can just buy some and then they can hold it.
I'm getting signs that we're at the end of the extra time. So let's give a round of applause to our panelists. And also a round of applause for you guys for spending the weekend with us here at Stable Summit. Thank you, everyone.
I have some swag. I was given by the marketing team. These are like plushies with like Maya in the back. So I'm going to throw them, and whoever catches them gets them. So.
And we're also not done yet. There's an after party on the roof.
I'm not strong, so if you're in the back, you're screwed. Okay, peace out. I have a baggie, which I'll give to you. It's like a grocery baggie. So it's like, so you can hold your bags. And then you say no piggy, no. It's bear market. We could only afford to.
The Bryce and Benjamin show will continue. So after party on the roof, stairs are by the coffee stand. It goes till 11.
Good job. What's up, guys? Yeah.
Nice to meet you, bro.
You guys should like form a comedy duo.